Hey, it's Taylor C. Mitchell, and join me today as I go do an overview over Absolute Watchmen. Alright, so this is the Absolute edition of Watchmen, released by DC. Absolute is their signature effort, I guess, to release books, and they're all released in these slipcases, all the same trim size. They all line up on your shelves very nicely. It really is a premier edition from DC. And one thing about comic book collecting and what I've been doing since I've kind of got back in the game is I want to curate my collection to be the perfect comic book collection for me, with the intention that it'll never be complete, it'll never be finished. So I'll have books that I cycle in and out quite frequently. I'll read a book. If I don't feel like I'm going to read it again, or don't feel like it's one of the best things I've ever read, or what have you, I might sell it. I might upgrade to a bigger edition or better edition. But the idea is that it's never finished, and that's kind of the fun of it. Watchmen is, in my opinion, receives all the praise that it gets and deserves all the praise it gets. It is the GOAT, the greatest of all time comic book, in my opinion. I think it captures what you can do with the comic book, and it breaks down a lot of barriers and molds of what the comic book industry was doing at the time, and kind of left it in a place that in some ways hasn't recovered since. There's still some creators that are out there that kind of imitated or I feel like filter through all their stories through the Watchmen model, and I don't think that's I don't think that's the idea of it anymore. And we'll get more into that later. I just want to do an overview over the slipcase here. So it comes in a slipcase. The spine says Absolute Watchmen, Moore, Gibbons, Higgins, writer, artist, colorist. Got the DC logo there, Watchmen clock there. So on both sides you have the Doomsday Clock. The top and bottom, or I guess the top's blank. The bottom is just the UPC with the price tag $99.99. But you can find this for much cheaper on places like In Stock Trades. I think has it for like $50 or $60. So don't need to pay full price for it. And Watchmen is certainly a book that DC has kept in print forever. They're always constantly reprinting new editions. There's the inside of the slipcase. Constantly reprinting new editions, deluxe editions, different trade paperbacks, different cover art on trade paperbacks. They're constantly keeping it in print. But for my money, this is the definitive edition to buy and own. If you want to own a copy of Watchmen, I think you have to get the Absolute. They've also released black and white versions. I think they call them like Watchmen Noir. And the only other edition that I would like put up against this one is the slipcase they came out with that has each of the 12 issues separated by one book in their hardcover, but they're standard sized. And what I mean by that is that, so I have Mr. Miracle here. It's my the best thing I read last year. But this is your standard size comic book. This is a trade paperback. And as you can see, in both height and width, the Absolute edition is much bigger. So in that slipcase box set, the books are only going to be this big. But they are separated by issue, which is interesting because then you can read them just like how they were intended back when Watchmen was originally released. Other than that, I think this is the way to go. Just do another size comparison. This is an omnibus. DC and Marvel both have the same trim size for omnibus. So you can see that trade paperback, the omnibus is a little bit bigger, but the Absolute is still the biggest. So not every Absolute edition comes with a dust jacket, but this one did. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure why. If you have a slipcase, I don't think you need a dust jacket. But there's the flaps. The back of it has that red design, and then a stark yellow with the blood streak on the front. And then the actual hardcover itself matches the slipcase almost bit for bit, with the exception of the DC logo. There's no clock up there, but the cover, front and back cover still has a Doomsday clock on it. And then the end papers, you can see spell out Watchmen, and the front and back covers. Watchmen. That's kind of a cool design. But not only is this the definitive edition to own because of the size, the trim size, you can really let the artwork breathe when it's blown up like this. And not only because of paper quality, because it's this thick matte paper, which I love. I think Watchmen's artwork looks, or Dave Gibbons' artwork, and John Higgins' colors for that matter, looks so much better on matte paper than they do on glossy, which is where I think I originally read Watchmen in a trade paperback that was glossy paper. But this just fits so great. But not only is it the definitive edition to own because of that, one of the famous images of Watchmen, but it also has all the interesting stuff in the back that really puts this collection on top of the pack. So it even includes all of the prose work. Like here's the Hollis Mace's Under the Hood excerpts from his autobiography, I guess. It's like that, the 9-panel grid too just plays so nicely. So one thing I realized too, if you're not familiar with Watchmen, I guess I should probably give you a little synopsis. Watchmen's basically a story of superheroes, dissecting superheroes and investigating what makes them tick and looking at the worst side of all of them. You think of superheroes traditionally, capes and cowls, they're do-gooders. They're human beings that only know right or wrong, and they only do right. But as you can imagine, if in the real world superheroes existed, you have to be kind of messed up and twisted to want to put on a mask and fight crime. Even though on the surface of its merits, you would assume that that was a good thing. That you were a humanitarian for wanting to do that. But also there's an egotistical side to it. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to be recognized? Why do you want this mask that you wear to be feared? So it does a lot of deep down digging into that, the psyche of who these people are. And then also, it starts off with this murder mystery. And it seems like it's just going to be this small story, this murder mystery. One of the heroes is murdered on the first page, and they're trying to investigate who it was. But the deeper you get into the story, you find out this is not a grounded, street-level superhero murder mystery. This is bigger than that. This is global, on a global scale, because it includes the Cold War and the fight over nuclear weapons with other countries. And it all revolves around Dr. Manhattan, who is the blue guy here, who, because of a science accident, actually becomes as powerful as a Superman, quote unquote. His powers don't align with what Superman's powers are, but he is the most all-powerful being in this world. And that creates, you imagine, if America had access to Superman, how that on a scale globally would affect things like, an arms race. So it starts off as a murder mystery and turns into this big, huge global scale. There's even so many interesting things that, as far as what comic books medium did, Alan Moore, he gets a lot of flack present day for his views on comic books, and I feel like it's a lot of misguided ideals, because Alan Moore loves comic books, and I firmly believe that he still loves comic book medium. He just hates the direction that it's gone. This is his love letter to the comic book medium, putting a blueprint of everything that you can do with comic books. So like I said, he has prose work in here, showing articles and excerpts of biographies, And then this is the comic within a comic, the Black Freighter, which is, you'll see this kid right here sitting at an old school newsstand, and he's just reading this comic book. So the comic book that he's reading, you can see here, like you can even match the panel for panel, which is another great thing about those absolute editions, you can notice things like that. But he's reading this Black Freighter comic book. This is a comic within Watchmen, but it's also aligning with what's happening in Watchmen. It's just amazing work. Oh man, this is Fearful Symmetry, isn't it? Yeah, Fearful Symmetry. This issue is incredible. And it's something, the great thing about Watchmen is the more times you read it, the more you notice things. Like, I've read it, I don't know how many times, but every time I read it, I am seeing new things and noticing new things. So the idea of Fearful Symmetry, this issue, is that it begins and ends the same way, and it meets in the middle the same way. So like page 2 and the penultimate page line up, and then these pages will mirror each other, and then these pages will mirror each other, and it gets all the way to the center spread where the 9-panel grid is broken into this symmetrical scene, if you will. Fantastic work. And it's just one of those things that, like, I love the fact that they use the 9-panel grid, because when you work within those rules and those limits, then you can do interesting things like this and break it. If you're working with nothing but splash pages and you know, spreads and crazy layouts, you can't really work within those rules and those limits and then begin to break them down in that way. And there's nothing wrong with splash pages and stuff, but that's just like the modern era of where comic books has gone. I love when, not only when artists work within a grid, but when they also can play around with it that way. Those are the famous psychologist Rorschach scenes. Get a little backstory on Rorschach. So, keep flipping through here. Just one of the greatest comic books of all time. And one thing I do want to mention too is that I always see this comic book pop up on the list of, like, if you're trying to give a comic book to a new reader that's never read comic books, what would you give them? And people cite Watchmen a lot, and I think that's like, this is one of the worst comic books to give somebody that's never read a comic book before. Because a lot of the appreciation that you have when reading this story is based on some past knowledge of the comic book medium. You have to, like, understand the usual things happening in comic books to understand the commentary that Alan Moore is having and Dave Gibbons throughout the story of, like, oh, okay, so this is kind of a social commentary, if you will, on the comic book medium. And you have to, like, so you're not familiar with comic books, you're not going to get that. And also the things with, like, panel layouts and interesting things they do with that, you're not going to understand either. I'm not saying that you can't enjoy it as your first comic book. I'm just saying that it's going to be more appreciated if you have a deep knowledge in the medium before you read it. So if you want to get someone into comic books, I don't think Watchmen's the way to go. Maybe as like their third or fourth comic book, if you're like setting it up in a way. But other than that, I think it's an absolutely fantastic story. I think it's the greatest comic book of all time for a reason. It's held in such reverence for a number of reasons. Maybe I'll do a deep dive one day into the story. Maybe I'll go like issue by issue. I'll do a series. If you want, that's something you'd be interested in, let me know in a comment below. I always love talking about Watchmen. I can talk about it all day. I always love when I'm on the comic book Facebook groups and they're talking about, someone's like, I've never read Watchmen before. I've read all these comic books in my life, but I never read Watchmen. I'm like, I get so excited for them, and I just want to talk about it with them right away when they're finished with it, and just get their kind of their ideas of it. So this is the back matter. So that's the end of the book. And then here are the minutes. Again, sticking with the clock thing. So this is Alan Moore. So he wrote this in 1988. I'm thinking he wrote this for one of the earliest collections of Watchmen, because right away they wanted to piece it together in a trade paperback, or they were really pushing the name graphic novel back then, a term that Alan Moore himself doesn't even like. He thinks graphic novel is just a pretentious word that people use to try to make comic books seem more than what they are. But in doing that, you're actually insulting the medium. Why not just use the word comic book and lift that up to where it should be? And I agree with him. I don't care for the name graphic novel either, unless it's an actual collected edition that was published and intended to be a graphic novel. But like a collected edition of single issues is not a graphic novel. Regardless, rant over. Here's some character designs and some early visuals of the work. So here's where this edition comes into play, of why this is the definitive edition of Watchmen to own, is this back matter right here. So you get to see the entire process of unfolding of how Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons got together and created this universe. Originally, Alan Moore's idea was to use the old Charlton characters, and he went to DC. Oh, wow. Is my camera just full? Okay. He went to DC and with that idea saying, I want to use all the Charlton characters, you have the rights to them now, and this is what I'm going to do. And obviously with, deaths and characterizing a lot of these characters as despicable human beings, he was going to depict the Charlton characters in a way that DC didn't think they could recover from. So they were like, Alan, we love your idea. We love what you want to do. We trust your work because you have done work for us with Swamp Thing and what have you. But we just don't want you to do this with the Charlton characters. Can you create your own characters? So this is that process. Is Alan Moore writing up these character biographies for him and Dave Gibbons to analyze the characters, because Alan Moore is of the mindset that you need to dissect every single character that's in a story, know what they're going to do in any situation before you can start writing the story. So this even tells you from the get-go, this was supposed to be Captain Atom instead of Dr. Manhattan, the old Charlton character. And as he's writing the excerpt, and then you see him change Dr. Manhattan, otherwise Doc Manhattan. And so Dr. Manhattan replaces Captain Atom in our lineup. So he even explains the process of like, oh, so we're not going to use the Charlton characters anymore. And then you can see the transition into the creator-owned characters. And here again, Thunderbolt was who Ozymandias was going to be. And then the name changes to Ozymandias. The Blue Beetle was who Night Owl was going to be. And then he changes to the Night Owl. And then the original Night Owl. And that's all these sketches too of what from Dave Gibbons, of just ideas of what they're going to look like. And Dave Gibbons actually came up with the name Night Owl based on a old character he created when he was a kid. So this is Rorschach, who was originally going to be the Question from the old Charlton characters. Even this character design that never shows up in the comic book, but underneath his leather jacket was going to be another Rorschach test, I guess, if you will, on his costume. Much preferred this different, the character design they stuck with the old trench coat tied up and the pinstripe dress pants. Looks a lot better than that. That's kind of like, I don't know, reminds me of an old, the old Spider-Man villain, The Spot, that was on the old 90s show. Here's the comedian. Dirty Harry meets Nick Fury meets Hannibal of A-Team. So he mixed Dirty Harry, Nick Fury, and Hannibal. That's kind of who he is supposed to represent. And then Nightshade, who turned into Silk Spectre. And here's some original character sketches. And this is the original Night Owl. That's the costume that Dave Gibbons said that he drew for his Night Owl character as a child. It looks more like this costume. And he was super stoked that it appeared in the Zack Snyder movie in the opening credits. It's like, hey, there's a costume that I created as a kid. It showed up on a movie. And here's some more images, ideas. This is okay, so this was a continuity sample script, or before the first script, kind of showing, they probably put this together showing DC what it's going to be about. And then here's the great thing about this book too. Everything's so great about this book. But here's the scripts. So Alan Moore is known for having very detailed scripted out comic books that he gives to his artists. Now, even I, in my naivete, had thought this, and people do think this, that this limits the artist by giving them so many details, and that's kind of the way comic books are today, is that the artist doesn't have a lot to work with. They just go with whatever the writer writes in the script, like panel 1, panel 2, panel 3. Fill that out, call it a day, clock in and clock out. It's not as much of a collaborative effort at times in today's day and age between the artist and writer. This was 100% collaborative. Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons met, continuously throughout the creation and duration of Watchmen's release. So these are the scripts, and you can. So this is page 1. What's going to happen on all of page 1? So let's open to page 1. So this is page 1. 9-panel grid. Obviously, the last panel there takes up the place of all 3. So that's the first image. This is panel 2's description. Panel 1 has all this in it. That panel right there is written all on that one page of script. And this is panel 2, so all of that text right there is describing what this panel is going to look like. And that text with that panel. So, like I said, it appears like it'd be very limiting for Dave Gibbons to work with, saying like, oh man, I have to fill out all these check boxes and stuff like that. That was not the way it was, though, because if Dave Gibbons had an idea, wanted to change something up, he would go to Alan Moore and be like, hey, maybe we should do this, or he would add his own pieces within the artwork. But this is just fascinating to me, all these scripts. And these are the layouts. Okay, so these are the layouts, the thumbnails that Dave Gibbons would just like sketch up real fast to like show them, okay, this is the way that's going to look and be designed, and then go and replicate that onto the page when he gets to it. So that's one of the beauties of Watchmen 2 is the artwork by Dave Gibbons, is that there's so much detail and there's so many Easter eggs and so many great things within each panel that there's just such a love and care of craft within this comic book. And that's not to say that the first time you're reading it, you need to like sit there and analyze each panel. It's not necessary for the story. In fact, I think the first read through of Watchmen, you could probably take out the prose, take out the Black Freighter comic book, take out the, all the written stuff, all the biographies and stuff, just to like run through the story one time, give it a one quick go. I feel like that would be like the Cliff Notes version of Watchmen, and then read it with the prose in it, and then read it as you're analyzing the panels. Like I said, every time you read Watchmen, you will notice new things that you didn't get the first time. Even interesting things with like the colors from John Higgins that he was doing with to depict mood or scene or era, time periods, all fascinating stuff. And you'll get some of those notes within here and find out why those decisions were made. And that's what's fascinating to me, is that this is the greatest comic book of all time for a number of reasons. These are different covers that they worked with. And it deserves to be analyzed and broken down and figured out, kind of like reverse engineer, how did they do this? How did they come up with this idea? And this has all the reverse engineering process stuff in it, in this book. Is it from Dave Gibbons in 1988? And then there's a picture of Mars from NASA. That's it. So this is a long video, but I think it was well deserved. Absolute Watchmen is the absolute way to own Watchmen. If you've never read Watchmen, would I recommend that you just go out and buy the absolute version first? Yeah, I'd say it depends on your confidence level, how much you'll like it. I know there are people that don't like it. Some people think it's overrated, whatever. I think those people are crazy. I say just go out and buy it. I mean, like I said, you can find this for $60. It's an incredible book that you're going to read multiple times over, time and time again, and want to dissect and revisit. I think it's well worth the money. I think I said it has a $99 price tag on it, but you can find it cheaper at certain places like Amazon and in-stock trades and that kind of thing. So yes, the masterpiece that is Watchmen, from Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons, and John Higgins. Read this. Let me know what you think of Watchmen. Leave some comments below. Like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know if a video of me dissecting issue by issue of the story would be interesting to you. Yeah, just let me know. Absolute Watchmen, thank you for watching. See you later.